Thank you very much for being here, both those who are going to provide testimony as well as those of you who are here to participate or hear. What I want to say before we first get started, I want to thank Congressman Torres for the invitation for us to be here to look a bit deeper into some of the issues that we're facing, and want to make also certain before we get started that we are not here to make any accusations against any individual, any state, anybody. We are here to secure information and not throw around accusations, but seek information. And accusations can be placed on a bumper sticker, and information requires a lot more commitment to securing facts and seeking solutions. So that's where we are. And this subcommittee will now come to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the subcommittee at any time without objections. Members of the House or House not the subcommittee are authorized to participate in today's hearing. The hearing is entitled "A Matter of Life and Death: Improving Fire Safety in Federally Assisted Housing." I would like to now recognize myself for a 3-minute opening. First, I'd like to welcome our first panel of witnesses, and but I think maybe we'll go back and do the opening statements, and because I want to make sure Mr. Torres speaks on these issues. On January 9th, a fire broke out at the Twin Parks Northwest apartment building, taking the lives of 17 Bronx, New York residents in what was New York's deadliest fire in 3 decades. The fire was reported to have been caused by an electronic space heater in a 3rd floor unit to stay warm on what was a cold winter morning. As the inferno spread throughout the unit into other parts of the building, survivors reported a thick, chalky smoke that blocked some residents from escaping and incapacitated others as they attempted to flee. Subsequent investigation singled out malfunctioning self-closing doors as a key reason. Smoke from the flames quickly engulfed much of the 19-story tower. The deaths of all victims, including children as young as 2 years old, was later attributed to smoke inhalation. The incident at Twin Parks Northwest was tragic. The incident was also preventable. And I want to be clear, what happened at Twin Parks Northwest was unacceptable to this committee. And look, I spent 7 years living in public housing with my mother, father, and 3 sisters. I understand the whole issue surrounding public housing because I know about it experientially. And I know that that there are always going to be struggles. So growing up and living in public housing was a source of pride for my family. If you were lucky enough to live in public housing, you actually had an advantage. It is painful for me to know that today there are families like mine who wait years and years for federal assistance only to live in a unit where they must resort to space heaters to keep their children warm at night. Families living in buildings where property owners have been negligent in their responsibility to provide a safe and healthy environment for their residents. This is not true of all federally assisted housing, or even most, but it is far too common. Federal, state, and local governments have a responsibility to conduct inspections, to enforce the law, and where necessary to hold owners accountable to the safety of their residents. The tragedy at Twin Parks Northwest was an unacceptable failure of this system, and it underscores the urgent need to improve oversight of fire safety in federal assisted housing. The tragedy at Twin Parks Northwest also underscores the effects our country's affordable housing crisis is having on American families and the need for additional investment. This committee, under the leadership of Chairwoman Maxine Waters, has worked diligently to advocate for federal investments in decent, safe, and sanitary housing for American families. We've held hearings. We have drafted and advanced bold legislation responsive to the needs of tenants. And we have now come to New York City at the request of Congressman Torres to highlight the critical need for this committee legislation to advance in Washington. Importantly, the legislation, still called Build Back Better, passed by the U.S. House of Representatives in November 2021, includes this committee's provision to provide $150 billion to expand access to affordable, accessible housing, including $65 billion to repair and modernize public housing, $1.6 billion to revitalize distressed multifamily properties, and $5 billion to address health and safety hazards in low-income housing. As members of this committee know, the investments put forward by this committee are a matter of life and death for American families across the nation. And as many of you watching today know, the incident at Twin Parks Northwest was not an isolated incident. I would like to thank you all for being here today, and I look forward to your testimony on what we need to do now. Now I recognize my colleague, Congressman Torres, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm enormously grateful to you and to Chair Waters for your commitment to affordable housing, not only here in the Bronx, but across the country. It's been 25 years since the United States Congress has held a hearing in the Bronx, and it is the first time we've done so on the subject of housing. It is long overdue. The Bronx is ground zero for the housing crisis in America, a crisis of both housing quality and housing affordability. The tragedy of Twin Parks Northwest reminds us that the need for safe, decent, affordable housing is not an abstraction. It is a matter of life and death. It is not an abstraction to the father who lost every member of his immediate family, nor is it an abstraction to the mother who lost her toddler, nor is it an abstraction to the children who have lost their parents. A lack of access to safe, decent, affordable housing can be a death sentence. It can be a fire trap imposed by a federal government whose housing disinvestment is so cruel and callous that it puts poor people of color at grave risk of losing everything, their lives, their loved ones, and their homes from a catastrophic fire. Twin Parks Northwest has held up a mirror to who we are as a society and the grave harm that we have done to the lowest income people in our country. Twin Parks Northwest was a tragedy, but it was no accident. It is no accident that New York City's 4 deadliest fires in the past 3 decades have all been here in the Bronx. From Happy Land to Woody Crest to Prospect to Twin Parks Northwest. Most of the people who died in these fires were immigrants. Garifuna immigrants from Central America and Ghanaian immigrants from Africa. Immigrants who came here in search for the American dream only to have their lives ravaged by a nightmare. A nightmare made in America and made by decades of deliberate disinvestment from communities like the South Bronx. Enough is enough. We cannot wait passively for the next tragedy to happen. We must make the housing investments necessary for keeping our people safe in the very place where they deserve to be most safe, which is in their homes. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now welcome the first panel of witnesses. First, someone who's been very helpful to our committee over the years, Mr. Adolfo Carrion, who is the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. Next, we have Ms. Sandra Clayton, who is a former resident of Twin Parks Northwest. Next, we have Ms. Laura Kavanagh, who is the Commissioner of the New York City Fire Department. And last, we have Ms. RuthAnne Visnauskas, who is the Commissioner and CEO of the New York State Homes and Community Renewal. We also have Ms. Vanessa Gibson, who is a Bronx Borough President. Thank you all for being here. And Ms. Carrion, Ms. Clayton, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chair Cleaver, Ranking Member Hill, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about my experience at the Twin Park Northwest apartment building. On January 9th, a fire in my building took the lives of 17 residents. Fire started when a portable heater fell on a mattress and ignited, and it spread because the doors were propped open but tenants had been living in dangerous conditions for years, and the property owners swept it under the rug. Their neglect led to this fire. I was a tenant in the building for 26 years. Over that time, I saw my building deteriorate. For years, the heat wasn't working properly. I kept 4 space heaters in my apartment to stay warm. Everyone I know had space heaters. I used to put plastic covers over the AC vents to prevent the cold air from coming through. Before this tragic event, my building was not perfect, but some issues should have been addressed, like proper working heat. Before the fire, the front doors of the building were not operating properly, and the building's alarm system was malfunctioning as it would go off at night. When the fire alarm went off in January, I assumed it was nothing because I was so used to the alarm going off. The only reason why I knew there was an issue and was able to get out safely is because my neighbor yelled down the hallway, "Fire, fire." If not for my neighbor, who knows what would have happened. After the fire, the Red Cross, Bronx Works, and other organizations were very generous. They gave me furniture, bed sheets, and pots and pans. I am so grateful. My whole life changed after the fire. I have been receiving counseling services, and I have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. I watched people who were being resuscitated and were not responding. My ex-girlfriend had tubes down her throat for weeks. I'm getting physical therapy now because I hurt my leg. I'm thankful that I made it out alive, but I'm sad for those who didn't. During the fire, I lost my dog. I was trying to save myself, my ex-girlfriend, and my dog, but I couldn't. I am so hurt inside, even if I walk around with a smile on. I'm at a new apartment now. I feel safer now. My apartment has sprinkler systems, and I control my own heat and air conditioning. The laundry is on the same floor. The cameras are working, but I'm worried. I sleep with my doors unlocked. I put my clothes for the next day by my bed, just in case I need to run out of the apartment if there's another fire. I'm hoping that I'll get over this over time, but constantly worried. I had to return to the building a few weeks ago, and my whole body reacted. I remember how the smoke was coming through the walls so thick and fast. I will always remember that smell. They're trying to cover up the smell, but I'll never forget it. There were many other health safety issues at my apartment building that were never fully addressed. There was feces, urine, and garbage sometimes in the stairwells and hallways. There were rodents in some apartments. Even though they brought in an exterminator, it wasn't fixed, so I had to pay for my own exterminator. The security guard didn't keep us safe. There was no cameras in places where it was needed, like in the stairwells. Management thought that just because we're low income, they can treat us poorly. We had become accustomed to living in bad conditions like that. There's been so many attention to the building after the fire. Everyone says they want to fix things, but they should have been doing this all along. I want Congress to take action to keep our buildings safe. It should not take a tragedy before people get serious about improving the conditions in these buildings. If this happens to us, it can happen to other people too. Congress needs to step up. Even more importantly, we need to be respected because we matter. Our lives matter. My life matters. I'm just one person, but I want to help change things so that other people do not go through this. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Bonnie, I think your words were powerful, and we are not just going to listen to them and forget them.
Thank you.
Mr. Carrion, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Cleaver, and good afternoon. Good afternoon, Congressman Torres. Welcome back home, and the other members of the committee that have joined us, some remotely. I'm Adolfo Carrion, Commissioner at the New York City Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development. The Twin Parks fire was a devastating tragedy, and we are grateful that you are continuing to focus on the important role of fire safety, as well as we all work to prevent future fires. we thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I want to take a moment to thank the city's heroic firefighters, EMS workers, and first responders who sprung into action within minutes of the fire, saving many lives. But we continue to mourn the 17 New Yorkers, including 8 children, whose lives were lost that day. Our hearts go out to Ms. Clayton, who is with us here today, and all of the residents that were affected on that tragic day. Since then, Mayor Adams and teams from across New York City, including HPD, have been working tirelessly to respond to this tragedy. Our first priority has been to attend to the immediate needs of these families in partnership with the building owners, the American Red Cross, the New York State Division of Homes and Community Renewal, and our fellow city agencies. Before turning to HPD's role in code enforcement and the topic of fire safety, I want to stress the critical role that federal resources play in all of these efforts. We are very appreciative of the millions of dollars in housing assistance allocated to New York City from the federal government. However, additional federal resources and tools are needed to combat a housing crisis that forces far too many New Yorkers to pay too much of their income towards rent or to live in overcrowded or unsafe conditions. More than ever, the city needs additional funding to protect the quality and longevity of our critical public and affordable housing infrastructure, to provide desperately needed rental assistance, to bolster local housing code enforcement, and to assist small landlords in properly maintaining their properties to ensure the health and safety of tenants. We were encouraged that significant housing investments were included in the Build Back Better Act passed by the House and President Biden's fiscal year 2023 budget request to Congress that includes increasing the affordable housing supply. HPD takes our role in ensuring the safety of New York City renters extremely seriously. HPD inspectors perform over 500,000 inspections annually, either proactively or in response to 311 complaints. Because we have so many important responsibilities, we recognize the need to be surgical in our approach to enforcement beyond the response to complaints. So in addition, HPD inspectors proactively look for and issue violations for multiple health and safety issues, regardless of whether HPD has received tenant complaints. These issues include lead, mold, carbon monoxide detectors, mice and roaches, double cylinder locks, self-closing doors, smoke detectors, and illegal gates. As part of its outreach strategy, HPD continues to educate tenants and owners about health and safety requirements during our general communications through updates to our ABCs of Housing Information Guide, which is also available in more than 10 languages and on our webpage on fire safety. Given the tragic event at Twin Parks, we know more can and must be done to protect our fellow New Yorkers. In response to Mayor Adams's Executive Order Number 12, we are proud to strengthen our partnership with the fire department around outreach and education, data collection and sharing, and strategies for enhanced enforcement of the fire code. Partnerships with the FDNY and other agencies have intensified our enforcement and education initiatives, and the city is fully committed to protecting the health and safety of all New Yorkers. We appreciate your support and attention at this moment of need for so many Bronx and New York families, and we look forward to working with you on this and so many other critical housing needs. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carrion. Ms. Gibson, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chairman Cleaver, Congressman Torres, and members of the Subcommittee on Housing, Community Development, and Insurance. I am Bronx Borough President Vanessa L. Gibson, and I'm grateful for this invitation to testify before all of you today on such an important topic, improving fire safety in federally assisted housing, and for choosing to host this hearing in our borough and our beloved Bronx Community College campus. As many of you know, on January 9th, the Bronx experienced one of the most horrific fires in our history. We were shaken by this 5-alarm fire that took place at Twin Parks Northwest, claiming the lives of 17 neighbors, including 8 children. My office, alongside city and state agencies, community organizations, and all of our elected officials, quickly sprang into action to provide immediate relief and help find displaced residents temporary aid and accommodations. We witnessed how our borough, the city, and parts of the nation came together in response to this tragedy. And thanks to the overwhelming support of our communities, we were able to distribute aid in the form of food, clothing, bedding, and so many other essential items for our families. I'm especially grateful for our first responders, the FDNY, Office of Emergency Management, NYPD, and the American Red Cross, who acted decisively and heroically to save as many lives as possible. This tragedy only heightened the many inequities our residents have historically faced living in federally assisted housing, and what we've known to be true all along. There is a lack of attention and accountability in addressing long-standing violations and a lack of priority and investment for necessary repairs, which ensures safe, quality, and adequate housing for our residents. This fire, as well as many others citywide, could have been prevented had these issues been addressed accordingly. The Twin Parks fire was determined to have been caused by a faulty space heater, a system commonly used by many families due to insufficient heating in their building, which records show was a constant complaint that went unaddressed here at Twin Parks. This unfortunate tragedy also escalated due to the malfunctioning and faulty self-closing door. Every death at Twin Parks was caused by smoke inhalation. The fire itself was contained to the apartment that it started in and the adjacent hallway. However, the apartment door did not close, and the evacuating family, unfortunately, the fire was unable to spread quickly throughout this building. In addition to Twin Parks, dozens of other families have been displaced in fires here in the Bronx and the city of New York just this year. The causes and effects of these fires have truly been diverse, but they all show that fire safety must be a priority. There is much work that Congress can do, both to prevent future tragedies like this and to improve the housing conditions for the people who have already been affected. We need stronger laws that hold landlords and property owners accountable, and more funding to help revitalize and preserve our current inventory of affordable housing. Congress should move forward on two of the bills before the subcommittee today, introduced by Congressman Torres. The first is H.R. 6528, the Housing Temperature Safety Act of 2022. This bill will require the owner of federally assisted rental dwelling units to install temperature sensors in such units on each level of the unit. The second bill is H.R. 6529, known as the Twin Parks Northwest Fire Safety Act of 2022, which would require owners of federally assisted rental dwelling units to install self-closing doors in such units. Although this is already the law here in New York City, adding a federal mandate will strengthen the enforcement of these policies, particularly when it comes to public housing and Section 8 housing. Along with local council member Oswald Feliz, I've helped to introduce two pieces of legislation here in the New York City Council that would increase compliance with the requirement for self-closing doors. Together, we should be able to ensure that every apartment door in New York City closes when necessary. I want to commend the House for the passage of the Build Back Better Act that's inclusive of housing provisions for additional funding for HUD, aimed at expanding access to affordable housing, tackling the severe backlogs and repairs, and addressing health and safety standards in all federally funded housing. It has been made clear from the discoveries of all of these tragedies that funding is desperately needed, and this is truly a matter of life and death. I also want to urge Congress to support our President's FY23 budget request, which includes more funding for HUD to address housing deficiencies. As you've heard from so many residents and witnesses, the road to recovery for Twin Parks has been long and burdensome. The timeline we envision for relocation has only been extended because of current housing crises, also coupled with limited federal vouchers. We truly can turn our pain into purpose, and I want to thank this committee for your work on tackling fire prevention and housing safety as a priority. I also want to thank Congressman Richie Torres, who has taken the lead in crafting federal legislative action in this year's fires that we've had. All levels of government, Mr. Chairman, can truly work together. Federal, state, and local government working with all of our stakeholders to prevent these future fires across the country. I thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning, and I look forward to your questions, and thank you so much for your leadership and your commitment to all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gibson, for your testimony. Ms. Kavanagh, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Cleaver, Congressmember Torres, and all members of the Subcommittee on Housing, Community Development, and Insurance. My name is Laura Kavanagh, and I am the Acting Commissioner of the New York City Fire Department. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the fire at the Twin Parks housing development and how we can ensure that the fire department and our partners in government are doing everything we can to keep New Yorkers and all Americans safe. On Sunday, January 9th, just before 11 a.m., the fire department received a call about a fire in a duplex apartment in the Twin Parks Northwest building in the Bronx. Approximately 3 minutes later, the first FDNY units arrived. The fire ultimately resulted in the death of 17 residents and 46 others were hospitalized. The scale of the tragedy was staggering, even for the veteran firefighters, EMTs, and paramedics who respond to life and death incidents every day. The deaths and injuries that occurred at Twin Parks were the result of heavy smoke that moved rapidly throughout the building, reaching stairwells and hallways. In total, the fire department dispatched 200 firefighters and 57 ambulances to the scene. Every available paramedic in the city was sent to help. 15 residents who were discovered in cardiac arrest were rescued and successfully transported to local hospitals. Dozens of others received assistance from firefighters and immediate medical care from EMTs and paramedics. But for the efforts of those first responders, the number of lives lost would have been even greater. In the aftermath of the Twin Parks fire, Mayor Adams issued Executive Order 12, which requires greater information sharing between the Department of Housing Preservation and Development and the fire department. This strengthened coordination will improve the way that the fire department conducts inspections. Executive Order 12 also directs the fire department and other city agencies to increase public awareness regarding fire safety practices. A key lesson learned from the Twin Parks fire is the importance of educating New Yorkers about closing the door when fleeing a fire. In this incident, the fire itself was contained rather quickly, but the door to the fire department and some doors in the hallways and stairwells throughout the building remained open, allowing toxic smoke to spread quickly to every floor. Closing the door in the room where the fire is located isolates the fire and prevents smoke, heat, and flames from spreading to hallways and stairs. The fire department has devoted a great deal of attention over the last several years to making sure that New Yorkers understand the importance of closing their doors when escaping a fire. We have worked to educate the public via social media messages, public service announcements, and community outreach. Our message is consistent: closing the door saves lives. Outreach and education are critical to maintaining public safety. FDNY's Fire Safety Education Unit has a robust program that reaches all areas of the city, focusing on messaging about closing the door and a variety of other topics. Active and retired firefighters host events with targeted fire safety content and materials to increase awareness of fire and life safety tips, as well as disaster preparedness. This includes, but is not limited to, fire safety presentations, smoke alarm installation campaigns, and mobile CPR trainings. The Fire Safety Education Unit also responds to all major fires, sending teams into the surrounding neighborhood within 24 hours to connect with the community, distribute fire safety information, and sign people up for smoke alarm installations. From 2015 through 2021, the fire department distributed or installed 200,000 free smoke alarms. In 2021, even with in-person presentations severely limited, the fire department conducted 2,100 fire safety presentations, reaching an audience of more than 150,000 New Yorkers. 601 of those presentations were here in the Bronx, which amounted to 28% of all presentations citywide. The rate of those events has increased dramatically this year. In the first quarter of 2022, FDNY has performed nearly 1,100 presentations, including reaching audiences of 22,000 school children. 900 presentations have been scheduled since the Twin Parks fire. We also post fire safety education materials online, and last year those pages received more than 26 million hits. Looking specifically at the Bronx, FDNY ramped up our outreach in this borough in the immediate aftermath of the Twin Parks fire, and we have not slowed down. In the weeks following the fire, we engaged with partners at the Department of Education, the New York City Police Department, the American Red Cross, and a wide range of community boards, community-based organizations, and faith-based organizations. We are coordinating with the Department of Education to distribute messaging to educators and to share opportunities to schedule presentations in their own classrooms. We are working with several individual building managers in the Bronx to set up virtual fire safety presentations for tenants. January 9th was the kind of day that stays with first responders for the rest of their careers. Nobody who was involved that day will ever forget the devastation and the loss. Our obligation to those we have lost is to learn from what we have experienced and recommit ourselves to finding ways to better protect the people of New York City. I thank the Subcommittee and the House of Representatives for your partnership and attention to fire safety issues and for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kavanagh, for your testimony. Commissioner Visnauskas, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to make an oral presentation.
Thank you, Chairman Cleaver, Congressman Torres, and other members for holding today's hearing on the need for new legislation to better ensure the safety of public and affordable housing in America. I would thank my counterparts at HPD for being great partners in this process. We would thank the FDNY for their bravery on that January 9th day. We thank the Borough President for really being a tireless advocate for the residents in this community. And we thank Ms. Clayton. We really value your voice in this conversation and are happy to be alongside you today. I'm RuthAnne Visnauskas, Commissioner of New York State Homes and Community Renewal, where our mission is to build, protect, and preserve affordable housing throughout New York State. As part of that work, HCR supports local governments and municipalities in administering Section 8 vouchers, rent stabilization and rent control, and state home ownership assistance programs. And we are charged with implementing Governor Hochul's ambitious 5-year, $25 billion housing plan to create and preserve affordable housing. Today I'm here to talk about the tragic Twin Parks fire that took the lives of 17 people and upended the lives of all the residents in the building, as well as their extended families and the larger community. I'm also here today to share both the state's response to the fire and to discuss what more Congress and state and local governments can do to protect residents living in affordable housing, including those in lower income, working class, and immigrant families. Following the fire, the primary focus of HCR and my state colleagues has been to support the residents in securing safe, new housing in a community of their choice. Together with the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, the State Office of Temporary Disability Assistance, and the Borough President's Office, many of your offices, as well as the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, we have actively engaged with the tenants, the property owner, and the affordable housing community to ensure that the building's residents received both immediate emergency assistance as well as options for long-term relocation. Additionally, HCR engaged CVR Associates, which administers project-based Section 8 vouchers on behalf of the agency in the Bronx, to work with all the residents of Twin Parks who wish to relocate. Current voucher holders can take their vouchers with them if they move, and HCR has worked closely with HUD to provide new access to Section 8 vouchers for eligible individuals who are living in the building without a subsidy. Additionally, Governor Hochul made $2 million available to victims for housing relocation services, case management, moving expenses, security deposits for new apartments, and reimbursement for families in need of new furniture and other necessities. We are thankful that the City of New York quickly made available a newly constructed affordable property in the Bronx called La Centrale, and to date, more than 95 families have applied to the new building. 66 families have signed leases, and 58 have already moved in. CVR is continuing to work with each family to identify housing that meets their needs in the neighborhood or community of their choice and on a timeline that works for them. Looking forward, we must work together at all levels of government to strengthen public and affordable housing protections before another tragedy can strike. The construction and maintenance of subsidized housing in this country is a multi-layered collaboration between federal, state, and local agencies that crosses urban and rural areas. Within this ecosystem, one of HCR's primary roles is to ensure that building owners comply with federal guidelines and requirements. As the Affordable Housing Agency for the state, we administer several programs, including Home, CDBG, Section 8, as well as 4% and 9% low-income housing tax credit programs. We provide fiscal, regulatory, and physical oversight of these buildings. We are required to conduct ongoing compliance visits in accordance with the federal rules by inspecting units in federally subsidized properties to confirm that owners are meeting those federal standards. We take our responsibility of making sure that building owners comply with these requirements very seriously. The tragic fire is a clear signal that we must do more. Our constituencies are depending on us all, federal agencies, state agencies, and local agencies, to identify and implement new ways to mitigate safety risks and to enhance health and safety requirements for public and affordable housing. As part of this, New York State urges Congress to advance some key measures. 1, increase federal funding specifically for safety inspections, as well as funding to support new technology-based infrastructure between local, state, and federal partners to better ensure compliance monitoring. 2, improve subsidized and affordable housing through the $150 billion proposed federal investment from Build Back Better to address the massive backlog of public housing capital needs and improve conditions for tenants in all affordable housing. 3, require space heaters to be produced and sold with automatic shut-off switches. 4, work with industry experts to determine the efficacy and affordability of heat sensors in subsidized multifamily buildings to increase building safety. And lastly, create a commission with owners, tenants, state agencies, and local code enforcement entities to examine, change, or update the HUD inspection protocols. Local perspectives are critical, as it is the local entities and tenants who are most aware of the unique features and the challenges of the housing stock in their own communities. We must work together to keep our low-income households, our seniors, our veterans, our vulnerable populations free from the risk of tragedy in their homes. While we've been doing this for decades, there is still much more to be done. HCR stands ready to work with our partners towards systemic as well as practical measures at both the federal and the local level that will increase the safety of buildings and better protect the individuals and families who reside in affordable housing across this state. I thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Visnauskas. Let me just, I want to talk, if I can, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Kavanagh, when I grew up in public housing, back in the Cro-Magnon era, the issues of self-closing doors was nothing. I mean, nobody said anything about doors self-closing. You know, we just made ourselves vulnerable based on what we know today. And following the 2017 fire that claimed the lives of 13 people in a Bronx high-rise, the City Council passed a law requiring self-closing doors in all buildings with 3 or more apartments. So can you explain the function of self-closing doors as it relates to reducing fatalities and property damage during a fire emergency?
Sure. And I'd say I'd also recognize that that's not something I knew growing up either. So that's why public education is very important to us and to me personally. I don't think it's a given. We'd like it to be. We'd like it to be like stop, drop, and roll is, something we all learned so often as kids. We don't even know where we learned it, but it's just there. That's what we want Close the Door to become, and so that's what we're working towards. But the reason is actually quite simple. It contains the fire to the either apartment or even the room within the apartment, and I think that's why this is important to emphasize even as we increase enforcement for self-closing doors, because in some cases we may be talking about an interior door to a bathroom or a bedroom that you could close, and it would contain the fire to that room and thus contain the smoke to that room. And as you've heard in this fire, smoke was the cause of the deaths, not fire. And so it is as simple as containing the fire to as small an area as possible.
But the malfunctioning doors did contribute.
Correct. In this case, the doors did not close in a number of areas, not only in the apartment door, in some of the hallways as well.
Do they require like some constant maintenance? Is there a process by which the fire department or some city or government agency checks the buildings to see if there is in fact compliance?
Yeah, so the fire department checks common areas, and this is one of the things we check are self-closing doors. HPD, our partner agency, is the one who inspects interior doors in apartments, so that's not something that we check, but both agencies have that in their inspectional protocol. I'm not sure about the maintenance. I'm not an expert in self-closing doors, but what I would say is there can be a few causes, so it's not always that the same part of the door might malfunction. Things like putting down a new layer of flooring could cause a door to get stuck open, which isn't about the hinge malfunctioning. So that's why they're important to check frequently.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Carrion, in 2016, the Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act HOTMA was signed into law. HOTMA made a number of changes to statutes that govern HUD programs, including the establishment of this minimum heating for HUD assisted dwelling units. Residents in public housing have continued to raise concerns about the temperature of units and have at times reported using equipment such as portable space heaters or leaving ovens open to stay warm. How does New York City ensure that housing units meet these temperature requirements to comply with both federal and local laws?
So, Mr. Chairman, the Department of New York, the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development is responsible for inspecting all of the multifamily privately owned residential buildings in New York City. There are approximately 825,000 residential buildings in New York City, and approximately 212,000 of those are multifamily privately owned buildings, which is an incredible amount of real estate and an incredible amount of housing units. We have a proactive and a reactive system. On the reactive side, it's what every smart municipality does, which is you create a system where people are able to file complaints and then you respond to those complaints. We have a corps of inspectors. We're budgeted for 429 inspectors in our agency. We currently have 287, so we're short of about 142 inspectors. But we're responsible for going out there and responding to, in the case of fiscal year 2021, in excess of 500,000 complaints that came in, and we issued, we did 630,000 inspections in just one fiscal year, and issued 620,000 violations. Many of them heat related. But we have a 9-point system, and I want to put it into context because every time we go out, we check for health and we check for fire. We do lead, mold, carbon dioxide detectors, mice and roaches, double cylinder locks, smoke detectors, illegal gates, and self-closing doors. We also answer heat and hot water complaints. So there is a constant drumbeat of inspecting properties, residential properties throughout New York City to ensure that folks have heat. And there's a system of violations that those violations need to be corrected almost immediately. There's a clock on those, so we're constantly chasing this challenge.
Thank you very much for your response. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Torres, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We know that if the self-closing door had been properly functioning at Twin Parks Northwest, the smoke would have been contained and countless lives would have been saved. Local law requires landlords to install and maintain self-closing doors. In addition to HPD, the housing department, both the buildings department and the fire department have the authority to issue violations relating to self-closing doors. Is that correct? And these violations are adjudicated by the Environmental Control Board, which as of 2020 had $1.5 billion in uncollected fines. So the inability to collect fines raises serious questions about the effectiveness of the city's mechanism for enforcing the self-closing door mandate, hence the need for federal intervention. And so my question to the HPD commissioner, if there were a federal mandate for self-closing doors, and if you had the authority to suspend a Section 8 payment to a landlord based on a violation of that mandate, would that provide the city of New York with a powerful enforcement tool?
Thank you, Member Torres. We passed, and you were in the city council when it happened, a local law making the self-closing door a life and safety emergency repair required condition that needed to be corrected within this 21-day period that's in the local law. That is a very important step toward addressing this problem. The housing quality standard at the federal level still does not have the self-closing door as a requirement, and other agencies can speak to this. We're encouraged by the fact that in our conversations with HUD, they're moving in that direction with an expected date of requiring self-closing doors of September 2023. We're encouraging that happens sooner rather than later.
And that would enhance your ability to enforce the
That would
self-closing
create a federal backstop. It would show the federal commitment to this important issue.
You spoke about intensified enforcement. You have data on the number of, since the fire in Twin Parks Northwest, how many inspections has the city conducted, how many violations has the city issued in relation to self-closing doors?
So it's an interesting phenomenon, and I think it points to the need for us to educate the public, because of that huge number of violations that we issued, 620,000, less than about 0.3%, or 99.7% of the violations issued were not for self-closing doors. We got 22. We issued 22,000 violations in one fiscal year. 80% of them were cured, but the violations and the complaints don't quite match up.
What about since the fire? How many inspections? If you don't have the data, can you get the committee that information?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The number of inspections and violations since the fire.
Oh, we can provide
Okay.
that, certainly, for sure.
As you know, the use of space heaters is often a cry for help and a cry for heat. And when it comes to heat in the apartment, common sense dictates that the temperature on the inside should depend on the temperature on the outside. If the temperature on the outside is lower, then the temperature on the inside should be higher to keep tenants warm. And yet during nighttime, New York City law only requires the indoor temperature to be 62 degrees, regardless of the outdoor temperature. The outdoor temperature could be 50 degrees or 25 degrees or 0 degrees. No matter what the outdoor temperature might be, the required indoor temperature at nighttime remains frozen at 62 degrees. Does that make sense? Does it make sense to have the same indoor temperature requirement for 0 degree weather as you would have for 50 degree weather?
I'm not a heat expert, but
At the level of common sense.
Yeah, right. Common sense tells you that you might want to be a little warmer than 62 degrees. I keep my home a little warmer than that. You know, we have a heat season that starts in October, and runs through the spring. We're coming up on that heat season, and I just want to take this opportunity to tell Congress that with your support, we can increase the core of inspectors that we have, the army of inspectors that we have, the creation of affordable housing, the quality of that affordable housing, make it modern, smart heating, all the things that our agency is charged with doing, which is creating high quality housing that's affordable to New Yorkers.
It seems like you acknowledge, even if the landlord is providing the legally required amount of heat, what the law requires might fall short of what tenants would need to remain warm in that apartment. You acknowledge that at some level.
I think just as a human being, yes, not as an official.
Fair enough. I'm going to wrap up, but how often does HPD and HCR, both administrators of Section 8, it's a federally funded, federally regulated program, but it's administered by local authorities, how often does HPD and HCR conduct Section 8 inspections of apartments and buildings, and are those inspections proactive or complaint-based?
I'll give you a rest. I'll go for a second.
Thank you.
We go out annually for project-based vouchers. As tenant-based, we're going out upon lease-up, so we're going out if the apartment turns over annually. And on the project-based, we go out and inspect 20% of the units every year in those buildings.
Annual inspections, how often?
And
the Section 8 inspections.
Yeah, the bonus that the Section 8 voucher holder in New York City gets is that they get a lot more inspections from the City of New York than any other agency.
And how often are those inspections?
But the Section 8 inspections, correct? I'm thinking they're biennial for the housing quality standard. And if I'm wrong, we can correct the record.
Get back to us on
Yes.
So if I'm a tenant with a HCR voucher, and I submit a complaint about inadequate heat and hot water, do you just wait a year in order to conduct the inspection, or is there a complaint-based inspection, and how long would it take to send a Section 8 inspector to my apartment?
So if we find a heat issue on the inspection, we, to the extent it was a health and safety, it would have to be corrected within 24 hours. Otherwise, there's a 30-day for all HQS inspections to be cured if they're not life and safety. But we also respond to tenant and complaints So if a tenant calls us and complains, we would go out. We also would refer tenants to the city's 311, which is really the first line of defense for issues around heat and hot water as they're enforcing the Housing Maintenance Code.
And I'm going to wrap it up. New York State and New York City have a confusing patchwork of inspections. There are inspections conducted under federal, state, and local law, inspections conducted by HUD at the federal level, HCR at the state level, HPD, FDNY, DOB at the local level. There are FOSS inspections of public housing conducted by HUD, inspections of rent-regulated housing conducted by HCR, inspections of all units conducted by HPD, inspections of Section 8 units conducted by HCR, HPD, and NYCHA. Which raises the question, does the left hand know what the right hand is doing? So suppose a New York City HPD inspector found a dangerous condition in a Section 8 rent-regulated unit. Would that HPD inspector automatically notify the Section 8 administrator, say HCR, about the dangerous condition in the Section 8 building? Is there a system of automatic notification among the various inspectors?
So the first level of responsibility is to contact the landlord, the tenant, start the clock on any especially emergency condition, level the penalties immediately if the condition doesn't get corrected. I am not, and you know I've been on the job for 8 weeks, so I'm not entirely sure what the protocols are between our agencies in terms of sharing that automatically, but I'm sure there is.
I suspect there is no system of automatic coordination and notification. Is that correct, Commissioner?
Correct. I think in general, first line of defense would go to the city. The city would ensure that that violation is corrected, certainly in the case of an emergency violation immediately. But they would not necessarily notify us if they went in and corrected that and it was resolved.
The city is conducting inspections under the local law, whereas if you're a Section 8 administrator, you're enforcing housing quality standards under federal law.
Correct.
So there should be a system of automatic coordination and notification among federal, state, and city inspectors. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Madeline Dean, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Cleaver, Congressman Torres, for holding this hearing and for allowing me to participate. I thank all of our witnesses also for testifying today. First, my deepest condolences to the extraordinary loss that your entire community suffered, and of course we all suffer after such a tragedy. The devastating fire that occurred at Twin Parks North is just unforgivable and preventable. So I'm appreciative of this hearing and the chance to listen and to learn from all of you. And while we're in the Bronx today, I wanted to shed light on what happened and what we can do differently in the future to avoid another Twin Parks Northwest. I wanted to take a moment to focus on a horrific blaze that occurred in our city, Representative Evans and mine, Philadelphia, just days before your tragic fire. In the early morning hours of January the 5th, a fire broke out in a Philadelphia row house owned by the Philadelphia Housing Authority, killing 3 sisters and 9 of their children. 3 sisters and 9 of their children. And in fact, Mr. Chairman, I have an article from the Philadelphia Inquirer entitled Remembering Those Lost in the Fairmount Fire that I will enter onto the record.
Without objection. My
heart breaks for these families. They were loving mothers, aspiring students. One was a 2-year-old baby. One of their children was a 2-year-old baby. Even more heartbreaking are some of the facts that have emerged around this fire. Not that I'm claiming to have expertise as to causes of fires, but it became clear through these tragic deaths in Philadelphia that they could have been prevented with greater safeguards, just like the things we're talking about today. In that property in Philadelphia, of the 7 smoke alarms in the house, all of which were the kind that require a frequent battery replacement, 4 were in drawers, 1 was on the floor without batteries, 1 was on the ceiling without batteries, and a final alarm was working but located in the basement. I've entered some legislation around smoke detectors in federally assisted housing to authorize $2 million for public awareness campaigns on health and safety. My first question really is for Ms. Clayton. I am so sorry for the loss and the trauma you have suffered. Can you talk about your experience as a resident in the tower in terms of the property maintenance, in terms of responsiveness to complaints by residents of health and safety problems?
Response to maintenance, I've been
I think your
complaints.
microphone's on.
In response to the maintenance, can you hear me?
I think you turned
Hello?
it off. Yeah.
It's on.
Congresswoman Dean, can you hear the response?
If she would begin again, I apologize. I did not hear her.
Thank you. In response of maintenance, I have put a number of amount of complaints about the heating. They'll come and they'll look, because we have baseboard heaters, and they call themselves blowing it out or whatever, because I don't know what they're doing. Okay, so it gets warm for maybe a day, and we're right back to my normal putting on my portable heaters.
And that was a common lot within your property, is that
Yes.
correct? And I've dealt with this at the local level here with private housing, not federally assisted housing, but the same kind of thing where the property owner responds, puts a temporary fix, and really never answers the question of health, questions around health and safety. Mr. Carrion and Ms. I apologize, Visnauskas, what are some of the barriers to ensuring that every affordable housing unit has fully functioning smoke detectors, for example?
I would say, thank you for the question, that we are very vigilant in our inspections around smoke detectors, and even in places where they are not always required when we're doing work in buildings, making sure they are being installed in the case of preservation and rehabilitation work. I think in general there is New York State and perhaps similar in some parts of Pennsylvania as well, the housing stock is very old and it is very much in need of investment. And I think at the New York State and New York City level, we have made incredible investments in terms of capital into the housing stock, but we need more. And we have been fixed, certainly from the perspective of federal resources, whether it's Section 8 vouchers or low-income housing tax credits, tax-exempt volume cap. These resources are the backbone of the work that we do to invest in the existing housing stock in this state, and we need more of them, and we need more of them by a large stretch, and they've been somewhat stagnant for a decade or more. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to keep pressuring and asking for resources like what was proposed in Build Back Better, so that we can exponentially increase the amount of investment we're making into the existing housing stock to make sure things like smoke detectors that are in older buildings where they may not be hardwired or may not be properly functioning are made safe for all the residents who live there. Commissioner Carrion.
Congressman, we may have another round of questioning. So
Thank you. I appreciate those answers, and I yield back.
All right, thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me to participate in this critical field hearing. My congressional district encompasses parts of the city of Philadelphia where in January, as Congressman Dean stated, we lost 12 Fairmount neighborhood residents in a fatal house fire. 8 of those who died were children. our community remains devastated. But I also appreciate HUD and ATF and the House Financial Committee for investigating this particular tragedy. And I thank Congressman Torres for taking the leadership that he's showing, that this is obviously not just a problem in New York, but it faces our nation. Because in Philadelphia, housing fires, the home 4 smoke detectors were not functioning. The 3 stories, 2 apartments housed 26 people. People do not settle for unsafe housing when they have better choices. But our nation has done little to provide financial stability and housing support for Black and very low-income families. They live very lively in places that are exposed to serious hazards, and it's important that we address it. So I look forward to working with Mr. Torres and the Financial Service Committee and HUD to strengthen federal policies relating to financial strategy, particularly for federal assisted properties. The site of Philadelphia Fatal House site was old, but Ms. Kavanagh, does much of our nation pre-1992 public housing stock market meet the standards under the Fire Administration Authorization Act?
I can't speak to that act specifically, but I can say that the newest constructed housing is the safest. It's built under the newest code and has the most safety protections in it.
How would you suggest policies around smoke detectors involving safety conditions, federally assisted housing, to prevent similar tragedies from occurring?
So I think when it comes to smoke detectors, as my colleagues have referenced, things like hardwired detectors are the safest. It means they're less likely to fail, run out of battery, or even be able to be disabled for a number of reasons. But in the absence of hardwired detectors, we strongly encourage and run many of our own programs and give away, as you heard, thousands of smoke alarms every year to ensure that those residents who need them have them, especially maybe those who can't afford them or seniors who may not be able to put them up when they fail. So we run a whole program around that, about getting detectors into the homes where they're needed.
So how could Congress incentivize building owners to improve safety measures and reduce fire risks?
I think many of the things we've discussed here, many of the things that were in the mayor's executive order will help from top down. But we continue as a department to also work, and certainly the departments in your cities would probably love to do the same, or already are doing the same, work from the community level as well, to help get residents know about their lived experiences in buildings and respond to those specific conditions and get them the materials that they need and the detectors that they need in their homes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Espiat.
Thank you, Chairman Cleaver. Thank you, Chairman Cleaver, and also my colleague, Congressman Richard Torres. And much has been said about the tragic fires in the Bronx. The Bronx seems to be the borough where, in the past decades, have witnessed and suffered tremendous tragedies with fires. Other neighborhoods of the city also that have a similar housing stock also suffer from tragedy in fires. And the Fire Administration Authorization Act of 1992 required the installation of fire sprinklers in high-rises. Obviously, much of the housing stock has been built before that. And probably a lot of that housing stock is currently not meeting those of safety standards established by the Fire Administration Authorization Act. I believe very strongly that prevention is driven by inspection and education. So my question to the commissioners that are here are, Commissioner Carrion, how many inspectors does HPD have?
Thank you, Congressman. I don't know if my microphone, I switched it on, I don't know if it's working.
No, I don't think
You
it is.
cannot, yeah. So I certainly want to make sure my answer is on the record here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I could hear you.
Okay, thank you. We are currently budgeted for 429 inspectors. And I think before you arrived, I mentioned that we have approximately 825,000 residential buildings in New York City, and 212,000 or so are multifamily buildings. We currently have 287 inspectors. We have vacancies. We've had a severe attrition. So we're trying to backfill those vacancies. Those are positions that are budgeted, but we need to backfill them.
Thank you. Commissioner Kavanagh, how many fire inspectors do you have?
So we do inspections two ways. We have fire protection inspectors who work out of headquarters and a few of our district offices. There are approximately 300 of those. Much like HPD, we have suffered, especially under COVID, some attrition and unfortunately the loss of some inspectors, but we are hiring again now. But our field units, our fire field units, also inspect buildings in their administrative units. And so we've done approximately 40,000 of those in 2021 by field units.
Commissioner Visnauskas, how many inspectors do you have?
Housing inspections are around the state are generally handled by the local housing agencies.
How many
like
do you have for
HPD.
New York City? Assigned to New York City, yes.
So we have about 50 inspectors that do inspections in our asset management portfolio, but we also have a series of administrators who are responsible for our Section 8 buildings, and they have inspectors that they hire. So I don't have the full number for those. Would really be the inspectors that are covering all the federally, the project-based Section 8 federally subsidized portfolio. They're not centralized state staff. They are contractors that we use. So I can get back to you with that full number.
So it seems to be that given the conditions of the housing stock in the Bronx and in other neighborhoods of the city of New York, the very dilapidated, unsafe conditions of the housing stock where families live, obviously, that we don't have enough fire inspectors. And again, prevention is driven by inspection and education. And so, Mr. Chairman, we must see how we can assist local authorities, but also I think that the local authorities have the responsibility, also the budgetary responsibility, to see how much more they put in their budget to hire additional inspectors. The second issue is education, because there is a direct connection between education and safety, fire safety. I remember speaking to the Commissioner Kavanagh about this issue. I know that in this building, in the Twin Park building, many of the families were immigrants. And this is a city that's very diverse. People come from different countries. They speak different languages. They have different customs. How diverse, Commissioner Kavanagh, is the fire safety education initiative program within the city? Is it bilingual, trilingual? Do we connect it to the Russian community in Brighton Beach, to the Chinese community in Flushing, to the Mexican community in El Barrio, to the Dominican community in the Bronx, to the African American community in Harlem and in the Bronx? How do we address the bilingual and culturally competency needs of fire safety? And do we have a reliable program that will educate tenants to take the measures that they need to take to save their families?
So we do have everything you mentioned. We do have bilingual and trilingual fire safety educators. We've also implemented local field units going and doing education themselves. And one reason that that's so significant is the department, as it's diversified, has given first priority to where a firefighter works, to the neighborhood they grew up in. And so what that also means is that in neighborhood schools, if you're getting your local company, you're far more likely to be getting somebody who grew up in that neighborhood, likely speaks the same language as you, maybe comes from a similar cultural or religious background, and we think that's really important. So we are doing all those things. Our website also comes in every language imaginable, so you can download materials in any language you need. But I would say, I think one of the things that has been significant in the wake of this fire and that the Adams administration has done for us is taking down the silos between agencies and trying to engage the community significantly more. As a community organizer myself, I really believe that education is not just about handing out literature, in no matter how many languages you have it. It really is about understanding the local community and engaging it from the ground up. And so you're seeing a lot more of that. The connections with clergy following this fire have been very important, and the connections, I think particularly in the local schools where many of these children of these immigrants attend and are bringing back information to their parents.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just conclude, this is a huge undertaking. I cannot guarantee that we have the tools in place to prevent this from occurring again. Just the number of properties across the city and the condition that they're in, the dilapidating, abandoned condition that they're in, requires a robust effort to inspect and to educate. And I think it requires a major investment. So, Mr. Chairman, I would look forward to working with you and Congressman Torres and the committee to see how we assist the city of New York, and particularly the Bronx, the borough of the Bronx, in this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're back.
I'm not sure if Mr. Green from Texas is on the platform or not. All right.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We cannot see you.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm showing on my camera. I'm so sorry. I'm mobile at the time, and I see myself in the camera, and I obviously can hear what's going on at the hearing and see it. But if you can't see me, I will understand, and I will simply say that I appreciate that you're having the hearing, and look forward to doing all that I can to help you with the remedies that are necessary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. We're going to excuse me, have another round of questioning. We'll give each member 2 additional minutes to ask a question, and then I'm going to do something I was told not to do. But we'll start now for the second round, and I would open the second round of questioning by asking Ms. Gibson if you can explain to me, maybe everybody else knows it, how the tenant organizations can help articulate the problems to people in positions of government, and how the tenants can become the eyes and ears that take in information and then give it to the proper sources.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. So first, the tenant and tenant leaders and organizations on the ground are credible messengers. They have the ability to connect and communicate with many of the residents. Oftentimes, they have a continuity of relationships. And what we've learned in the days of Twin Parks is that there are credible messengers on the ground. Organizations like the Gambian Youth Organization, like the Muslim Network Association, many of our Muslim leaders, and other community leaders of different faiths have really come together and really surrounded these families with love and support. And the first, of course, priority was to guarantee that there would be hotel accommodations in the immediate days after January 9th. And now, weeks later, we're still working to accommodate long-term relocation efforts for the families. But what we've also learned, and what you typically will learn in the events of these types of tragedies, there are many families in our city and in our state that are doubled and tripled up. You have many families with multiple children, large families that are living in apartments that are not conducive to their household size. So what we've been able to do on the ground with organizations like Bronx Works and CVR is a lot of intensive case management, understanding the household needs, household size, household incomes. This is a working class family in this building where many of the families had working income, and so many of them need to be accommodated as well. So working with a lot of our tenant organizations like GYO and others, we've been able to understand a lot of the very unique needs of many of these families, immigrant families that come from so many different places, parts of West Africa, the African American and the Latino community. We've been able to really navigate and help understand what they're going through every day.
Thank you very much. My 2 minutes are up, but we're going to try to get Mr. Green from Texas on, if you can't see him, I'm describing he's a very handsome, youthful man, athletically built. So, Mr. Green, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
That's every member of Congress.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for those very kind words. My mother would love you for that. Thank you. I do have a question. As you know, the American Rescue Plan provided some $20 million to FIP, the Fair Housing Initiative Program. And we have some $70 million proposed in the Build Back Better Act. My question has to do with safety and how this additional money could be a benefit. So is there someone who would like to respond to how an additional $70 million could help us with some of the issues that we are confronting currently? And I do want you to know that these issues touch our hearts because people are losing their lives, and the title for the hearing is most appropriate. Would someone kindly respond to the question with reference to providing an additional $70 million to this FIP program?
Any other panelists?
Is the funding specifically targeted to outreach, or is it another type
of
of funding?
The funding is from the Fair Housing Initiative Program, and it's for enforcement with these new funds to help you with enforcement.
I think I could sort of just table set and say I think we all believe on this panel that there's a big opportunity with our federal counterparts at HUD to be better coordinated on communication. It certainly has been something from the Hochul administration day one down towards the Adams administration around better communication coordination. I think funding with a coordinated strategy in New York City and really statewide around space heaters, around self-closing doors, are really critical, and we rely on tenants to understand also when something isn't working, that they know who to call, and they know that they can report it. Oftentimes people are afraid to report things that are wrong in their apartment, so sort of addressing that issue, I think, as part of an outreach plan would certainly be something that I think all of us at this table would be happy to utilize funding to really make sure people understand what type of enforcement is available and what their rights are.
And
Mr. Carrion.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, just echo that to the member from the good-looking gentleman from Texas. We would be deeply appreciative for an additional $70 million in fair housing initiatives that advance safety in housing, both private and public. That's our challenge, doing that, and it's part of our mission to enforce fair housing, the fair housing laws. So we would deeply appreciate that. And let me say that very quickly, one of the problems that we face here, going back to Member Espaillat's comment about education, is that we get so few complaints from certain pockets of the population, from certain buildings. The number of complaints for self-closing doors was infinitesimally small. And now with the mayor's executive order that brings the fire department and the HPD together to address this issue and enhance education, this $70 million would go a long way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful for the time, and I yield back.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Torres.
Madam Borough President, you've been in city and state government for more than a decade, and city and state government can be siloed. And I worry about a lack of coordination and communication among the inspectors at various levels of government. You know, not only is Twin Parks Northwest subject to the housing code and the fire code and the building code, all of which have their own inspectors, but the tenants have Section 8 vouchers from 3 administrators, right. HPD, HCR, and NYCHA, all of which have their own inspection regimes. So the patchwork of housing inspections is more of a cacophony than a symphony. Do you share those concerns? Or?
I do, and I think it's important, excuse me, that we continue to work together and have an interagency coordination both from HUD, from HCR, as well as HPD. and the mayor's executive order making sure that there is more consistency on inspections. I mean, when you hear the numbers, and I agree with Congressman Espaillat, we need to make sure that we are at our budget and capacity on all of the inspectors that we have at HPD, at HCR, as well as FDNY, because it's really important. Tenants feel a sense of calling 311 multiple times and not getting any response, or it taking days for inspectors to come out. And by the time the inspectors come out, those issues are sometimes corrected, sometimes they're not. So I think while we encourage New Yorkers to call 311, we have to make sure that there is a consistency on the inspectors that are coming out. And agencies are actually working together. I think in all of these tragedies, because since Twin Parks, January 9th, we've had a series of other fires, far less fatal, where we've not had any fatalities, thank God, but we've had a lot of displaced families. We've had fires in Morris Park, in Allerton, in Parkchester, and other parts of the Bronx, and we have a number of families right now that are housed in area hotels. And so it's called into question not only the housing stock, the aging infrastructure of some of our housing stock, the usage of, the safe space heaters that sometimes are not working, and the faultiness of that, but also holding landlords accountable and making sure that they do the work that they are supposed to do. So I agree that there has to be more coordination, and if we learn anything from Twin Parks, we have to learn that coordination is critically important in keeping affordable housing safe and essential for New Yorkers.
And if I can squeeze in one more question, to the commissioners, what can the federal government do to create a system that enables all inspectors at every level of government to coordinate and communicate and talk to each other? How do we create more interoperability?
I certainly think HUD sort of convening us for a conversation like that would be incredible, as you said, with the HQS inspections being done by NYCHA, by HPD, by HCR, as well as other federal inspection regimes. I think making sure they're coordinated across them all and that we are all coordinated up and down the chain, I think would be a great, as we come out of an important hearing like this with things to do to make things better, would really be an important first step in that effort.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and also say that the data sharing between agencies at different levels is really important. Obviously, we've increased our coordination significantly under the executive order with our fellow city agencies, but getting that coordination and that data, our inspectional regime is based on a risk-based algorithm, so the more data that algorithm has about the experiences of residents, about the violations at maybe other levels of government that we don't have, makes our algorithm more powerful. It means we're getting to the buildings most in need more often.
And Congressmember, I agree with those points made by my colleagues. We currently have task forces that we sit on at the local level that include Department of Buildings, Department of Investigations, the Fire Department, Department of Health and Mental Health, but that's at the local level. I think there's an opportunity for us to do it at different levels of government, and when I served as HUD Regional Administrator, we convened locally the HCR Commissioner, the HPD Commissioner, and the NYCHA Chair on a regular basis. That was just sort of a symbolic gesture at the time. We tried to figure out how best to coordinate our efforts, but if at the national level, across the many municipalities, the thousands of municipalities, the federal government can step in and encourage and cajole that kind of activity, that would be very helpful.
My time has expired.
The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean, is now recognized for 2 minutes.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. And I'll go back to something that Ms. Clayton said about warning systems, and that the fire alarm would go off so often as a false alarm in the building that they got to the point of not thinking it was an urgent call for the residents to move out. Commissioner Carrion and Commissioner Kavanagh, could you speak to the state of play in public housing in New York around smoke detectors, hardwired or not, functioning within the buildings or not, and what your inspections show there? What percentage of our public housing stock has safe working smoke detectors?
Congressmember, thank you, and our condolences to you from one city to another on your loss on January 5th. Our inspectors, our army of inspectors goes out every day. They did right through the pandemic, nonstop, and they check 9 very important items: lead, mold, carbon monoxide detectors, mice and roaches, and then they do a 4-point test on fire safety: double cylinder locks, smoke detectors, illegal gates, and self-closing doors. By the way, that HUD is now looking to add to their housing quality standard. If any of those systems is not working, we issue a violation right away. And on the smoke detectors and the self-closing doors, those are to be corrected immediately.
I thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I see my extra time has expired. I thank you for offering that to me. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Dwight Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask the president of the borough sort of the same question I asked Ms. Kavanagh. Do you have any suggestions in terms of saying the Congress incentive building owners to improve safety measures? What would you suggest?
Thank you for the question. I definitely think that increasing more inspections in federally assisted HUD buildings would be great. I think having the federal presence on the ground is a critical part of this work. I definitely think that access to additional HUD vouchers would be great. What we've learned in Twin Parks is that many of the working families were not initially eligible for vouchers, and many of them felt that they should be accommodated, although they have working income, but because of the trauma faced by the fire at Twin Parks. And I also think that there needs to be federal intervention when it comes to the regulation of space heaters. Space heaters do not have automatic shutoffs, and sometimes if you buy them in certain parts of our city, they're inexpensive and they're not necessarily the best quality. But families in our city are forced to use space heaters because of insufficient heat by their landlords and management companies. So I think if we had access to additional vouchers as well as more federal oversight in terms of inspections of self-closing doors and the regulations of space heaters, I think that will be a great step of progress.
I'd like to thank you. I yield back the balance of my time to the chairman.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Esfiod.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on the borough president and space heaters, it almost seems like a natural thought to me, having represented districts with the highest concentration of rent stabilized apartment and now the highest number of NYCHA units, that anytime there's a fire, almost my automatic response is there must be a space heater involved in it. And it comes as a result of lack of heat. And it's not usually on the cold days. On real cold days, you get the heat. It is on days like today that it's not too cold, not too warm. So, Commissioner, could you give us like the breakdown on what the regulations are of when landlords are supposed to provide heat? Just like the Heat 101 course.
Congressman, I wish I could do the Heat 101 course. I will tell you in very general terms that our heat season starts in October and goes through the spring. The temperature, I believe, outside has to be below 55 for heat to be required or something like that.
55 is the heat.
I believe, and again, the record might be correct.
So on a day like today, you're not getting any heat, but the temperature may dip down to 40 later on this afternoon.
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, is there something? I think there's a problem there. I get a lot of complaints from seniors and families that they're not getting enough heat. And I think if the day starts at 55 or 57 degrees, but it dips down to 40, at night it's going to be very cold, and they're going to turn on that heater. And that contributes to the number of fires. So is there anything that the city can do to regulate better, maybe increase the threshold for landlords to provide heat?
I will tell you, not as Borough President number 12, this is an ongoing debate, right? Where is the threshold temperature at the right place, and are the dates correct? I'm not prepared to address that as commissioner, but I certainly am interested in coming back to the committee with some expert advice.
Well, let me just conclude, Mr. Chairman, and say that it is rampant that the numbers of complaints that I get in NYCHA buildings, in rent-stabilized buildings, about a lack of heat on days like today. It's just something is wrong there, and I think that's forcing families to go to the local store and buy that space heater that will then potentially, because of the bad quality of the equipment itself and other matters as well, contribute to these tragic fires. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Esfiat. We now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I did not thank you appropriately enough. This hearing is most important because this involves multiple places, not just one city. And it's important also because we're losing lives. I don't know how we can allow what we see to happen and not make the kind of inquiry that you're making. So I'm eternally grateful to you for giving us this opportunity to address some of these issues. Having listened to the questions and heard the responses, I have but one final commentary, and it is that I stand ready and willing to work with my colleagues. We have a number of pieces of legislation proposed. Having had an opportunity to peruse them in a very cursory way, I find favor with them and look forward to seeing us flesh them out so that they can become a part of the healing process. And this is a great opportunity for us to do some good. So I look forward to working with colleagues on the good agenda. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Just as we close out this hearing, we don't do this, but Ms. Clayton, is there a question that we did not ask? Is there a question that should be asked? Is there something that you want to know?
Thank you. My question is, why is it that it's only once a year that the buildings or the apartments are inspected? Me, personally, I think they should be inspected at least 3 times a year.
Anybody?
It's a great question to ask, and I think that we would all say that I think we are in lots of buildings multiple times. I think that in the case of this building, certainly for our inspections, we didn't have any heat complaints. And so there's also sort of a disconnect, I think, on some level between the lived experience of the people in the building and what is showing up on the inspection reports. And I think that's a complicated issue to tackle about the efficacy or the what's required in the inspections. If we did them more, would we get more? If we still sort of got the same outcome, we're not in the right place. So I think it's a great question to ask. I don't necessarily have an answer about doing it more as much as to sort of acknowledge that I think that there's a little bit of a disconnect in what we see when we go out there and what's actually happening, and we have to get at the root of that. And I also think it goes back to investment in older housing stock, and we just have to be making sure that we're making capital investments in multifamily buildings occupied by low-income households, by seniors, by children, by every vulnerable population we have in this city, to make sure that they're living in safe, warm apartments. It's essential, and it's a big ask of the federal government and for state and locals to do that kind of investment, but it's really at a crisis point, and we need it.
Thank you, Ms. Clayton.
I think I'd just second that, actually, and say that I think we had a good takeaway from this hearing, which is to meet with our federal and state partners, because the additional data, especially from the residents, can make a difference in how often we inspect a building.
And if I can just close out with this, we had the same experience. We have a lot of visits to buildings, a lot of inspections. You heard the numbers. They're huge, 620
20,000 violations, etc. But then we look at the history of a particular building, and we find that there were 10, 12 heat complaints, and then this fire happens. And so I think there's an element here that is the tenant human element of maybe a fear of complaining for fear of reprisal that we're going to have to really deal with. And that's an issue for us to take up as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Ms. Clayton, and thank you for raising that issue. You're the person that is most impacted by the questions and the answers and the actions that are forthcoming. I'd like to thank all of you, all of the witnesses, for your testimony today. And without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for this purpose. And I would like to ask the witnesses to please respond as promptly as possible. And without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the records. We're going to take a 5-minute recess before the next panel, which is a panel of the U.S. Housing and Development Department, who will be here. And let me thank all of the members who are on the virtual screen, and if you're able to stay, we appreciate it. But we'll take 5 minutes to change witnesses. Thank you. our first panel of testimony today. Next, we have Ms. Ashley Sheriff, who is the acting deputy assistant with the Real Estate Assessment Center at the HUD, who will be appearing as a technical witness for us today. As a reminder to our witnesses, you are limited to 5 minutes, and without objections, your written statements will be made a part of the record. Ms. Empress Samuel, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much. Chairman Cleaver and members of the committee, I am honored to have been invited to address the Committee on Financial Services. Appointed by President Biden, I serve as the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development's Regional Administrator for New York and New Jersey. I was born in Brooklyn and grew up in NYCHA Public Housing, so the opportunity to address you all today on matters of safety in HUD housing is particularly personal. Prior to serving Secretary Fudge and President Biden, I had the honor of representing Brooklyn as the City Councilwoman for the New York City Council District 41, which has the largest concentration of public housing in the country. Above all else, I want to first offer my condolences to the families of the victims of the tragic fire at Twin Parks Northwest, and let them know HUD continues to do whatever it can to support you in this time of grief and need. And thank you, Ms. Clayton, for sharing your story. No loss of life due to fires or other health hazards, wherever it occurs, is acceptable to us, and we grieve with you, and we are here to support you. While it is beyond our authorities to manage fire prevention in every home, HUD takes very seriously the role we play in fire and safety standards in HUD-assisted housing. And as a former NYCHA resident, I am extremely passionate on carrying forward this work that is a top priority for Secretary Fudge. Although we can sadly not change the events that made this hearing necessary, I am here today to discuss the substantial work HUD is doing to make its housing safer in the Bronx, in Philly, and all communities nationwide. In March of 2020, HUD paused its health and safety inspections due to the risk of COVID exposure. In April of 2021, Secretary Fudge announced that HUD would resume health and safety inspections of its approximately 35,000 multifamily and public housing properties on June 1st of 2021. Secretary Fudge set a bold goal for HUD of completing inspections of all multifamily and public housing properties by September 30th, 2023. I am pleased to report that since restarting inspections, HUD has inspected over 13,000 multifamily and public housing properties and is ahead of schedule for inspecting 100% of these properties by September 30th of 2023. This would be the first time HUD has done this in an approximately 2-year span. HUD has made tremendous progress to substantially improve its physical inspections across all HUD-assisted housing. In this effort, the national standards for physical inspection of real estate, known as INSPIRE, would emphasize resident health and safety and standardize inspection requirements across HUD's rental programs, as opposed to the 2 standards that is used today. INSPIRE also includes several new, more stringent health and safety requirements for smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, fire doors, electrical systems, and infestation. INSPIRE would provide an opportunity for tenants to provide formal feedback about their unit's condition that could be used to prioritize inspections and address urgent concerns. For fire safety, INSPIRE standards would implement the National Fire Protection Association 72, which is the preeminent national standard for smoke detectors and fire signaling. It also would establish a minimum temperature requirement and a requirement of permanent heating source, allowing residents to live more comfortably and be less reliant on supplemental heat sources. In conclusion, I thank you for your attention and dedication to keeping our HUD families safe. HUD shares this commitment, and we know there is more the federal government must do. Beyond inspections, the public and multifamily housing stock is in need of significant repairs and renovation. President Biden and Secretary Fudge stand behind House passed proposals to significantly increase funding that will restore housing developments across the country so that people live in safe, healthy housing that they can be proud of. So on behalf of Secretary Fudge, HUD appreciates your ongoing support of Inspire initiative. And as the new HUD Regional Administrator, I thank you for holding a field hearing in this community, my community, that has suffered such tremendous tragedy at Twin Parks Northwest. I look forward to working with you to serve this community, and it was an honor to speak with you, and I am happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and let me congratulate you on your appointment to this significant position. I represent Kansas City, Missouri, and we're having an issue right now with one of our major developments failing an inspection, and so I want to just, if I can, spend my 5 minutes on dealing with this issue of inspections. And I recognize that you are, been on the job only a short period of time, but how many HUD assisted properties receive a failing score during their last inspection, and what percent of the total HUD assisted portfolio does this represent?
Thank you, Chairman, for that question. And I would, at this moment, because it's such a technical issue, I would like to have the Deputy Assistant Secretary, Ash Sheriff, respond to that question.
All right, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Cleaver, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's an honor to participate in this hearing, and thank you for your attention to these issues. Approximately 5%, a little less than 5% of properties fail our REAC inspections, at least based on the most recent REAC inspections conducted of both the public housing and the multifamily portfolios. Certainly, we at HUD view any failing property as problematic, and we want to get that number to 0% ultimately, right, where we have no failing properties. But unfortunately, we do have failing properties, and you mentioned one in your community of Kansas City, Parade Parks Homes East, which we're very well aware of. And, certainly we want to do everything we can within our power at HUD in terms of both using our inspections as well as our other oversight, monitoring, and enforcement tools to make sure, right, that we are raising the level of housing in our properties. Certainly, as has been discussed on the previous panel, as well as in this forum, and Ms. Ampry, the regional administrator's opening statement, HUD housing is in need of investment, right? And 73% of our housing was built before 1984, at least for the public housing portfolio, and certainly, right, declining investment in public housing results in declining physical condition. So certainly we work with our housing partners to help them do what they can to maintain safe and healthy housing. And the inspections are certainly one part of it, but there are other components to ensuring that housing is safe, healthy, and quality for our HUD families.
Well, thank you. Your Parade Park actually should have failed the REACT inspection. Had they passed it, I would have been here with another whole list of questions and issues and anger. But what happens when a housing choice voucher unit receives a failing inspection score? What's the next step? And then the next step?
Hi, I'm gonna have to ask our Deputy Assistant Secretary to respond to that one too, because it's a very technical question.
Sure. And thank you again, Chairman Cleaver. When a housing choice voucher unit or a voucher unit fails inspection, it depends on whether or not the unit is occupied at that time. So if, prior to a family moving into a unit, a housing quality standard inspection is required to take place. If that inspection results in a failed unit, the family is not allowed, or the household is not allowed to occupy that unit. If it is one of, for example, the annual housing quality standard inspections that take place typically, and a family is already in the unit, there are multiple requirements in place to ensure that that unit is brought up to the conditions that we expect and meets our health and safety standards. So first and foremost, they've got to address the health and safety issues within 24 hours. That is a requirement across all of our inspection protocols. Where life-threatening defects have been identified, it is HUD's expectation that those are remediated as quickly as possible, and those need to be certified right to either HUD or the public housing agency that administers those vouchers. For other defects, they typically have to be addressed within 30 days. If the defects, Chairman Cleaver, are not remediated in the time frame specified by HUD, HUD has a number of tools at its disposal and works with its public housing agencies accordingly. And PHAs, and it's important to recognize that PHAs manage the HAP contract with the owners and landlords of those units. But under HUD requirements, those PHAs could abate those HAP or housing assistance payments to owners, landlords, and that is a compelling way, right, to bring about the changes and the remediation necessary. In extreme circumstances where the housing assistance payments have been abated and these deficiencies have not been corrected, the PHA should terminate the contract and find an alternative rental unit for the family in place.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Green of Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for your kindness and for your caring as well. I am most appreciative to you, Madam Regional Administrator, for indicating that you are sympathetic with the plight of persons who are suffering at this time. It means something to me to hear that come from you as an administrator. I'm concerned about the inspections, and I'm appreciative that you're doing what you can through Inspire to improve standards. I think this is important. And I believe that FIP, I've mentioned this earlier, the Fair Housing Initiative Program is of great benefit in this process. We have tried in Congress to make sure that FIP is properly funded such that it can be of assistance to you. The Fair Housing Initiative Program allows for some help for you, for its help with enforcement. Can you just address how the Fair Housing Initiative Program, or Ms. Sheriff, as the acting deputy assistant, how this program helps you with the enforcement as it relates to these issues that we're confronting?
Thank you so much, Congressman, for that question, and it is something that we discuss all the time. Entities that receive FIP resources help people who believe they've been victims of housing discrimination, which includes when the protected group has limited access to high quality, safe, accessible housing. And on health and safety, FIP organizations can play a critical role in raising awareness of emergent issues in communities to federal, state, and local governments, as well as assisting with fair housing investigations that seek to remedy such concerns. Resources for FIP entities allow them to advertise their services, educate tenants on their rights. And all of these things can have a deterrent effect on if there's something going wrong or potential wrongdoers. So assistance and being able to get funding around these resources, in particular for the Fair Housing Initiatives program, is critical. And I'm not sure if Deputy Assistant Secretary want to jump in if I'm leaving anything out, but this is very critical and needed, and this is something that we discuss all the time.
Thank you. I welcome any commentary from the Deputy Assistant if she has some.
So I think the regional administrator covered it very well, and certainly I will add, with respect to inspections in particular, we believe what we're trying to do under Inspire is very much aligned with what we are trying to do to promote fair housing and fair housing outcomes for residents. We know that 66% of residents of public and assisted HUD housing are members of communities of color. And it's critical, right, that their housing is as safe and decent and sanitary as that housing that's available to market rate residents. And so we have made that a priority of what we're trying to do with Inspire. And we've had resident workshops and have worked with our Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, and they have commented on our standards. And we believe that the lived experiences of those residents are absolutely critical to developing our Inspire standards and making sure that those standards promote that housing that is fair and equal with other residential housing that's available to market rate renters and owners.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sheriff, and we will now recognize the gentleman who is responsible for requesting that we do this hearing, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Regional Director Ampry Samuel, before you were the Regional Director, before I was a Congressman, before Vanessa Gibson was the Borough President, we were all in the City Council, and we passed a law that established a New York City heat sensor program. Heat sensors have the ability to monitor and report heating levels in apartments in real time so that you can hold landlords accountable for providing tenants with heat and hot water. During the heating season of 2020 to 2021, the HPD pilot program led to the installation of heat sensors in 26 buildings with a history of heat violations and complaints. Among those buildings with heat sensors, complaints fell by 56%. Among those buildings with heat sensors, 7 buildings had 1 violation, 2 buildings had 2 violations, and none of the buildings had more than 2 violations. Indeed, 1 building had 500 fewer heat complaints than it did in the previous heating season. Given the success of the city local heat sensor program, would HUD support the creation of a federal heat sensor program?
And thank you so much, Congressman Torres. And I just have to say in this quick moment of time that it is an honor to be in this position before you as a member of Congress. HUD shares your commitment to fire safety, and I know that our HUD headquarters has been engaged with your staff, your team, and your committee as it relates to the proposed bills, and we all are working towards the same goals. And I have to say that with Inspire, and I know we've talked about this before, but with Inspire, those standards also contain enhanced fire safety standards, which address many of the issues that you have outlined. And we are doing that now. We have rolled out Inspire as a pilot program to be fully introduced by 2023 across all of our properties. And so we are doing that under Inspire. But I can say that our staff, our team at HUD headquarters will continue to engage with your committee so that we can all be working towards the same goal.
As you know, I have legislation that would require self-closing doors in federally funded affordable housing developments. But earlier, Commissioner Carrion from New York City Housing Department, the Housing Preservation and Development Agency, testified that HUD was moving in the direction of mandating self-closing doors as part of HQS standards by rule, by regulation. Is that accurate, and what's the timeline for finalizing such a rule?
And so I'll ask Dash Sheriff to chime in on that. But I did want to say quickly that there are, and I recognize just from your previous comments that there are several safety standards. We have HQS, we have REACT, we have the UPCS. And so again, with Inspire, it would be a way to make that more consistent across HUD assisted and unassisted properties. But I'll have Deputy Assistant Secretary chime in.
Thank you, Congressman Torres. So we have greatly appreciated working with your committee, and we have evaluated the legislation through the formal technical drafting service process. You are correct that under the Inspire regulations that are proposed right now, we will be increasing the standards and including a requirement for self-closing fire doors, and that will apply to all HUD housing. So it'll apply to the public housing portfolio, the multifamily portfolio, and voucher units, where our standards are not aligned today. Inspire will align our standards for all types of HUD housing. So wherever you live, if you're a resident of HUD housing, you will be subject, your unit will be subject to the same, more stringent requirements that we're proposing under Inspire, and that includes for self-closing fire doors.
What's the timeline? Just to interject, what's the timeline?
Oh, yes, I apologize. So we hope to have Inspire implemented by the end of federal fiscal year 2023 or September 30th, 2020. However, I will say we are already conducting Inspire demonstration inspections and have done over 400 of those inspections so far.
So my time is running out, so I just want to quick in.
Yep.
I pointed out earlier that government is heavily siloed. There's a patchwork of housing inspections at every level of government. So take as an example Twin Park Northwest. Not only is Twin Park Northwest subject to the fire code and the building code and the housing code, all of which have their own inspectors, but the tenants have vouchers from 3 state and local Section 8 administrators, HPD, NYCHA, HCR. And there's no system to ensure that these inspectors are coordinating and communicating and talking to each other. Is HUD willing to play a role in convening all of these inspection regimes in the hopes of creating a system that breaks down these silos and enables these inspectors to talk to each other?
Well, Congressman, I wanted to mention that Commissioner Carrion mentioned that when he was the regional administrator, he started these quarterly meetings, and those meetings have not stopped. And as the new regional administrator, I too will continue with those quarterly meetings so that everyone will be able to sit at the table and be able to discuss what's happening and work together towards the safety standards. And I've already started, I've had my first meeting with HPD and HDC and the mayor's office, and so we are starting that. We started that about a month ago, and so we're committed to making sure that we are having these quarterly meetings so that we can have a more consistent way of having safety standards for our residents.
I see my time has expired. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Congresswoman Dean. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, again, for convening now this second panel to talk about these critically important issues to all of our communities. And I want to thank our public servants in HUD. Thank you for the extraordinarily important work that you do, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience and information with us today. I was wondering, I had talked with the previous panel about the tragedy, the twin tragedies, January 5th in Philadelphia, the row house fire killing 12, 3 sisters and 9 of their children, and of course the fire that we are more focused on today. I'm wondering if HUD, following those tragedies within days of each other, had any emergency meetings or after action items that took place as a result of these twin tragedies recognizing there are many other fires and other tragedies, but these were just so striking. Was there any action by HUD in response to the 2 fires?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for your question. Again, my condolences to the families in Philly as well. So there is a procedure at HUD when there are incidents to this level, when we're talking about tragedy and disasters and fires. That's something that is automatically flagged by our secretary herself and our deputy secretary. HUD reached out to the Public Housing Agency in Philadelphia. HUD reached out immediately to folks on the ground in the Bronx, and we had meetings right away. And so, but because I wasn't there at the particular time, I was not the regional administrator, I'll ask Deputy Assistant Secretary to step in. But I know that just from briefings today, we're still briefing every single day about the fires. And there's a weekly meeting held to make sure that families are receiving the services that they're supposed to be receiving. But I'll have Deputy Assistant Secretary step in.
Yeah, thank you, Congresswoman Dean. Yes, I was in my capacity at the time, and there were several emergency meetings immediately once we found out about both of those terrible tragedies, and I share my condolences as well. And we continue to meet on a daily basis about what we can do, right, to prevent those types of tragedies in the future. In addition to providing kind of localized assistance to the families, we have started looking at everything that we can do, right, from a health and safety standpoint, not just through Inspire, but are there more short-term things that we can do? We've offered assistance to, the housing agencies that were involved in both cases. And we've even offered up our inspectors to come up and supplement inspections of those particular housing agencies. So this is something we take very seriously. As the head of the Real Estate Assessment Center, I can honestly say that week was the worst week of my professional career. We take these issues very seriously, and we want to do what we can to prevent these types of tragedies in the future.
I appreciate that. And something else I was thinking about in terms of your work and reviews of these tragedies and your assistance is the state of the art on sprinkler systems. And we know, for example, the Philadelphia fire, what I understand from reading and speaking to those on the ground is it was an extremely fast-moving fire. And had there been a working sprinkler system, it could have prevented some of that horror, maybe put the fire out well in advance. I get that fire sprinkler systems, retrofitting older buildings is expensive. And I know in both public housing and in private housing, there are going to be property owners, landlords resistant to that. I have combated that at the local level in my own communities where a property owner is fully renovating a building but doesn't want to go to the expense of putting in sprinkler systems as he or she should. I'm a co-sponsor of the legislation by Bonnie Watson Coleman, the Public Housing Fire Safety Act, that would create a HUD grant program for public housing agencies to install automatic sprinkler systems. I know my time is running low, but can you speak to that legislation and HUD's perspective on moving us into the next century and retrofitting buildings with sprinkler systems?
Congresswoman Dean, I can answer that. We welcome any efforts and corresponding funding to retrofit, HUD housing and bring HUD housing up to better physical condition with modern technologies like fire suppression systems such as sprinkler systems. And certainly, aged housing that we know that we have in our portfolio is extremely expensive to retrofit. However, that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be, something that should be addressed. And certainly, if you look at the language of the 1992 Fire Administration Act, it says that any new construction and or substantially rebuilt construction should be built with these types of systems in place. And so, you know, because HUD housing is old and because, you know, we have not been able to keep up with the backlog of physical needs, it's been hard to do those substantial rebuilds that would be required. But certainly those types of systems have been found to prove extremely effective in protecting life in these circumstances.
We'll keep fighting for that, and I admire my colleague for putting forward the legislation. Again, thank you both for your work, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Dwight Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate HUD's effort to respond to the fatal fires in my congressional district in Philadelphia, and Mr. Torres' leadership that he has taken, not just in just his particular district, for what is occurring. So to the regional administrator, I'd like to ask you, can you explain the connection between federal disinvestment, affordable housing shortages, and the increase on the fire risks?
Thank you so much, Congressman, for your question. And yes, we know that far too many people with low incomes, especially people of color with low incomes, live in deteriorating housing. And affordable housing is scarce in Brooklyn and in Pennsylvania, and we must preserve whatever affordable housing that we absolutely can. President Biden supports increased funding to rehabilitate, redevelop public and private affordable housing, and we know that was part of the Build Back Better legislation. It included $170 billion for affordable housing investments. But we also know that there is fire risk and increased older housing stock because safety standards have to be evolved. They have to be modernized. And that's what we keep talking about over and over and over, that even though we have this deteriorating housing stock, we need to make sure that our safety standards are speaking about the issues that we see today. And as we renovate or redevelop housing, we also bring that housing up to modern day safety standards. So more funding is needed. I can talk about that over and over and over. But that funding will help us to improve fire safety and other health and safety concerns for our residents. And so there is a connection between federal housing investments and fire risk. And we know that requires, like we've been talking about today, more funding and more modern safety standards.
I'd like to piggyback real quick. In your view of HUD's position, would you say, what are the consequences of the Senate failure to advance the Building Back Better Act on its critical housing investments?
The consequences are a matter of health and safety, life and death. Right? This hearing today is about tragic fires where there was a loss of life for children and families in 2 states. And so we need funding. And we share that commitment. We share that commitment in making sure that our units are safe. But it is it's a detrimental impact if we don't have the funding that we need. And ultimately, when Congress is able to make substantial investments into affordable housing, we know that our families will be safe. And this conversation around fire safety and folks dying because of it will be addressed. We need more funding. And the problem is if it's not addressed, it passed in the House and did not in the Senate, we need more support. It's detrimental to life.
I yield back. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing, and my colleague from the great state of, or his leadership. I really appreciate it, as well as Chairwoman Maxine Waters for just having this discussion. I think it's fantastic. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let me also thank Administrator Empress Samuel. Thank you very much, and again, congratulations on President Biden's appointment to you for this region. Ms. Sheriff, thank you very much for your participation. I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Mr. Green from Texas, Ms. Who else we have? Ms. Dean, and of course, the gentleman of great distinction from Philadelphia, Mr. Dwight Evans. And I'd like to thank Maxine Waters, the chair of the Financial Services Committee, for her willingness to allow us to do this hearing. And I gotta say that I've been around a while, and Maxine Waters is about as close to a Tasmanian monster as you could get when it comes to housing, affordable housing. She is obsessed with it, and which I love, which is why I'm on this committee. And we were certainly given additional fuel when Mr. Richie Torres was appointed to this committee, and I am thrilled that he is here, and I'm also thrilled that he asked that we come to the Bronx to deal with this issue that should be painful to every single American. And frankly, if we do nothing, I think we are guilty of whatever happens down the road. We need to move, and we need to move quickly, and that's one of the reasons I think this legislation that the president has put before us is extremely important. We've got to approve that so that we can begin to deal with these problems. We can still do big things in the United States of America. We can still do those things. We've got to put some pettiness aside and understand that you cannot sting and make honey at the same time. You got to choose what you want to do. I choose honey. Thank you very much. This hearing is now ended.